if I may invite our very last speaker of the session, Heather, to invite us to imagine, perhaps
Yes.
even hope.
Perhaps. I want to first thank you for hanging in. I think if, I might have gone for a beer myself if I wasn't the last speaker, but anyway, thank you very much, and to the organizers and to Jay for facilitating this. So this is a multidisciplinary event. I want to say that I come from working 25 years in religion and ecology and gender. So those are the disciplines I work with. I also come from conflict and peace studies. So these are the disciplines that have informed what I'm doing today. I don't have a PowerPoint. Our topic of climate change is we haven't talked actually very much about the details of climate change, and I won't either, but I want to say that it's one planetary issue. The state of the oceans are another, the changing of the ocean currents, fresh water, rainforest reduction, loss of biomass, species extinction, toxins in every system of the planet. So these are planetary systems. Toxins have also gone into virtually the DNA of most animals. So these are what we're talking about when we look at ecological issues. The severity to me should not be underestimated. There are also bioregional issues, as you mentioned, and also for Costa Rica, these are bioregional issues, so insects, mammals, birds, fish, water, soil, and on and on. We can look at human issues of water, energy, food insecurities. These are our issues. So I'm not going to go any farther into ecological disaster data, but it really is pervasive. It's in most ecosystems, and it is overwhelming. And that's not even talking about environmental racism or extractive economies or poverty or other more complex facets of the ecological decline and crisis. So when we use the word Anthropocene, it's because it's recognizing that the Earth's biosphere is entering a new era. This is the meaning of the Anthropocene. That we have an ecological impact on a geological level. That's what it means. We're ending the Cenozoic era. The Cenozoic era is the last 65 million years of life on the planet. That's the meaning of the Anthropocene. So I'm presenting that to say this is really the state, as I understand things over having done this for 25 years, I think it is the state of the planet, and the Anthropocene means we are entering a new geological era. For myself, the Anthropocene can mean, well, not for me, but for some, the rise of humanity, so the domination or the age of man, as the patriarchs would say. But I want to say that it means that human beings emerged from, belong to, and can only flourish within a biosphere. So that's my meaning of the Anthropocene. So when I use the word hope, I just want to clarify, and then I have 4 trajectories of hope. There's nothing simple about hope. It's not wishful thinking. It's not optimism. It's not thinking positively. It's not expecting miracles or divine intervention. It's not hoping for a better world after this one. Hope is not self-centered. Hope is very difficult. Hope requires data and knowledge. Hope is not dedicated to an outcome. It's much more about an orientation. Hope means that there are options, there are possibilities, that one may not see the results. So hope is basically the opposite of cynicism, despondency, and despair. But it's not optimism. So I'm going to talk about 4 trajectories that people in my world, religion and ecology, have worked on for the past 25 or 30 years that the word hope has some meaning. And the first is about earth sciences and evolution. So what has been known about the planet in the past 100 years? We're the first humans to really know anything about the universe, 13.8 billion years, as Professor Henning said, the processes and the dynamics of the universe, the galaxies, solar systems, the green planet. This gives us a perspective of time that is quite new. The Earth, 4.5 billion, that this is a planet with a biosphere. I'm sure this is my first time in Newfoundland, but Newfoundland has some of the oldest rocks and grows more in the tablelands. Newfoundland also has the oldest fossils of complex multicellular fossils. So these are dating the biosphere. This gives us a perspective of time. When I use the word evolution, I'm taking it from a biologist, Ernst Mayr, who says evolution is not a theory or an idea, it's actually the name of the process of nature. So that's what I mean by evolution. So if we're going to answer the question, the future of nature, we need to know something about evolution, geology, the biosphere, about how does life evolve, adapt, its diversity, the theories of emergent complexity, interconnections, that there are eras of life and there are periods of extinction. Evolution indicates that nature is living, dynamic, it's not orderly or mechanistic, it's not random or determined, it's patterned but not predictable. The last mass extinction, 65 million years ago, ending the Mesozoic, beginning the Cenozoic, we are now in another era of mass extinction. This era that's ending, the Cenozoic, is one of the most complex eras that have ever existed on Earth. They call it the age of the birds, the fish, the flowers, and the mammals. So we come from this era of ingenuity of the Earth, of entanglement, these are all these theories, interrelationship, complexity. We are a primate among the last remaining 5 primates. We have existed approximately 1 million, Homo sapiens 50,000. We call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, the wise. I mean, seriously, what are we thinking? So, for me, this starting point changes how we answer the question, what is nature? We have to understand Earth processes and who we are in this scheme of things to answer the question, what is nature? That we have evolved from, belong to, and can only flourish within this biosphere. And we are one species among many, so in my field we call it the Earth community, which challenges the anthropocentric hubris of our era. Which means that other animals are our kin. They're not us and animals. We are one animal among many other animals, many of whom have language, tool-making, symbolic consciousness, communication systems. We've underestimated virtually most animals and their sophistication. So why is this hopeful? Evolution bends the mind. It expands the horizon, and it changes the reference points. We are not the reference point for nature. We are embedded in the natural world. It's not our context, it's not the environment, it's our source. I'm distinguishing this, for anyone's interested, from intelligent design, and it conflicts with creationism. So just to situate, where does it fit with those? That's where it fits. Evolution is not well studied, it's not integrated into the Western worldview, it's barely understood, and this is a problem. And although it can be perceived of as an abstract, perhaps irrelevant to the ecological crisis, I think the insight from evolution is that nature is very dynamic. Long history, processes that have nothing to do with us, so we are not the reference point. And this brings us to my second point about, this informs our worldview. So the second point is about ecological imaginaries and worldview. I'm taking this term from Cornelius Castorius, who coined the term social imaginaries, used a lot by Charles Taylor. The word I'm going to use is worldview, but it's the same word of this complex belief systems, emotional patterns of who we think we are and who we think we are in the world. So if we are going to respond to the ecological crisis and answer the question, what is the future of nature, we have to change our thinking. So I know there's often a move to say, could we please stop thinking and talking and get doing something? My own view is that the crisis goes very deep into our thinking, our worldview, our identity. So this whole idea of worldview is rather significant, because if we answer the question, what is nature? Well, it's a resource, or it's a background to the human life, or maybe it's sacred, or maybe it's just real estate, or it's habitat, or it's undeveloped land, or it's our playground, it's a place of beautiful vistas, or it's a living earth community. So depending on how we answer that question, what is our worldview, how we understand nature, that's how we will act. Western societies have a utilitarian view of the natural world and its resource management, but this is, in my view, part of the problem. because images are decisive. Much depends on how we answer the question, what is nature? And if you don't believe me, think about the women's movement. What is a woman was at the heart of the women's movement. Or who gets to be called human? This is an image. How do we answer the question? And it is decisive. So this question about worldview needs answering. How are we going to respond to the future of nature unless we go deeply into the question of worldview? Because the solutions differ depending on how one answers the question. Myself, I would lean towards a deep ecology, earth community, evolutionary science perspective. However, as we move to greater awareness of the ecological crisis, apocalyptic scenarios are actually filling the human imagination. And corporate state apparatus have a great deal of control over the social imagination. So late capitalist societies have saturated our imagination with images of success, which are all based on an ecologically extractive economy. And the way the corporate world has imaged success, happiness, or the good life, I believe has saturated our imagination to the point that we're quite unaware of it. So what is it going to take for us to become critically aware of what is dominating our worldview? If nature is only a resource, then the conversation about economics versus ecology makes sense. If nature is a living, vibrant reality of intrinsic value, then it's no longer a conversation about economics versus ecology. That's really actually a very false way to frame the issues, in my view. So in my world, ecological disaster data proliferates, and we can see that most governments are unable or inept to address the severity of the ecological issues. I don't know if that's true everywhere in the world, but it sure as hell is true in Canada. I will not discuss Harper in the election, except to say, don't vote for Harper in the next election, but that's all I'm going to say. So governments are not necessarily the place of change, but I think what's difficult when we become absorbed, when we start hearing so much ecological disaster data, it's very, very difficult to respond because we don't have strong enough scientific, most of us don't have enough scientific background. We're not able to envision alternatives. We feel a sense of personal or political powerlessness, and apocalyptic predictions generate fear, and fear impairs our sense of agency. So this is a very big issue of what, we can't ignore the disaster data, but how are we going to deal with it? So, in my world, people talk a lot about an ecological worldview, which means we need to become ecologically literate. We need to understand where our own bioregions, our biosystems. It's not necessarily becoming a scientist, but it's becoming ecologically literate. Evolution helps that. And for those of you who pay attention to environmental disaster data, you'll start to see that the way ecological issues are reported and the way the solutions are debated, it almost never includes a discussion about values, attitudes, responsibilities, long-term, short-term, the cost of the choices, and preparation for ecological instability. And this is what Bill McKibben was saying. I was also at the same conference. We need to prepare for ecological instability. We need to be aware of what is happening. So the issues in Germany, as you mentioned. So conversations about values and ethics and meaning are very relevant to anything about what is the future of nature. So where can public conversations like this take place? As far as I know, there's two major institutions. One is the university, and the other is the religions. Now, I've worked for 25 years in religion and ecology, and I'm not going to say that they're all benevolent or easy. There's enormous amounts of complications within that, but they are public institutions where conversations could take place. Universities are another, and democracy is not a place where public conversations take place anymore. There really isn't any public debate, and this is of some concern. To the question of what is going to educate our view of nature. What are we going to do with our experiences in the natural world? How are we going to reflect on them? In what community and where? How are we going to get a vision for the future that is alluring? If you study evolution, I mean, it's dazzling. If you understand the dynamics of nature, the creativity and ingenuity of the natural world is overwhelmingly dazzling. Sometimes I have a daughter who's 19, and when she was 5, we were all studying the dinosaurs, and she lost interest, but see, I never did. And it's really astonishing to me that no one over 5 years old, except a few paleontologists, are interested in dinosaurs, because they reigned for 350 million years. That's quite a record. We're not even close to that. The natural world is dazzling, butterflies and all the birds. But we don't know this. So how are we going to get a vision that's actually rooted in data, that's not optimistic, silly, wishful thinking, but that is attractive? So to me, that's a very important question of worldview, and how can we take our experience of the natural world? Most people who spend any time in the natural world, not everyone, but many, are filled with some kind of sense of awe, wonder, reverence, gratitude, something like that. But we consider those much more superficial experiences than economic analysis or scientific, except they're really not. They're foundational to human understanding. So we need something that has a counter-apocalyptic vision, which in my world is a blend of science and humanities. Are we all right still for a few more minutes?
Yep. Yep.
Hang in. All right. People need a vision and they need hope in order to make difficult ethical decisions. People can't make difficult ethical decisions when it's despair and the vision is apocalyptic. Third area of hope is ethics. So there's a huge realm of environmental ethics, which I won't go into, but very, very vast. I'm just going to accentuate 3 themes that I think are relevant. One is the work on eco-justice. So this is social economic and how that relates to justice. Another one is animal rights related to eco-justice. Are we actually going to begin to consider animals in a real way, that they have intrinsic value and a right to live here as much as we do? So I'm going to skip a section there on animals, but the same thing is happening, I want to talk about a little bit more about ethics and ecological democracy. So we have all kinds of efforts all over the world: community gardens, ecological restoration projects, citizens movements, protests, civil action, resistance, the climate march. All of these things are actions of hope. And hope requires actions. You have to do something you have to work for change to experience hope. So local actions are actually happening in many places in the world. The difficulty, or a difficulty I see, is that nation states are politically and ideologically ill-equipped to address ecological problems. They're too embedded in the global economic system, and democracy is fairly managed around the world. But it's really the rise of the security state that I am increasingly attentive to, of what is happening, that the rise of the security state is overtaking democracy. So if any of you follow the work of George Monbiot in England, he talks about the British mafia state. If you follow the work of Chris Hedges, he talks about empire. Bill McKibben talks about empire. So these are really leading ecologists around the world who are saying, pay attention to the rise of the security state, because it's obscuring ecological issues. It's becoming the war on terror. And we can all, if you read the papers, you know what that is. So sectarian violence is increasing. The world is becoming more militarized. So what is going to be a counter-response? So the hopeful response against that is global ecological democracy. So there's a whole world of research and study and movements, and the terms are inclusive democracy, ecological citizenship, biospheric egalitarianism, global biodemocracy, and on and on. These are all kinds of movements emerging around the world. And they're saying that the planet, we need to be planetary citizens, that our identity as ethnic groups or nation states are not going to help us ecologically. One reason is that planetary systems, such as climate change, are difficult to address because their jurisdiction has nothing to do with nation-state boundaries. Political and ecosystem boundaries are completely different, so we need new governing structures. So these movements that are happening, also have a commitment to peace and nonviolent social protest and social action. So these to me have something to do with hope, and they are an antidote to both unresponsive governments and militarized nation states. So there are movements like the Earth Charter, the Charter of Human Responsibilities, the Earth Democracy Charter, the People's Agreement on Climate Change, and the Rights of Mother Earth. These are coming up all over the world. So it's very interesting. So this is signaling to me an awareness that is worth paying attention to. And they share an ethical appeal for a common humanity in a living Earth community. And my last comment is the relationship between aesthetics, ethics, and spirituality. So if you think of the word aesthetics, beauty, but it's actually a combination of ethics and beauty. So to understand the natural world as a beautiful place is often that it's static, and I'm here and the natural world is here. But in the older theories of aesthetics, that was where we drew ethics from. Ethics had something to do with beauty and reverence and responsiveness. And there's a great deal more scientists now interested in this blend of science, spirituality, and ethics. So that's one side of it. And the other side of it is that the natural world historically has been the place called sacred for virtually every community ever until recent late capitalism. So there's something about the natural world that people don't have language for except when they move into, I'm not going to say religious language, but something like spirituality or sacred or holy or mystery or spirit. And people do not destroy that which they experience as beautiful or sacred. That is the history of the human communities. People do not destroy that. We have lost a sense that the natural world is revelatory or a spiritual or sacred place. We have lost that in late capitalism in the Western world, but it is quite old in the human imagination and human history. So, my last comment is that these aesthetic and emotional capacities of human are quite strong. They're a very strong drive in us because we do respond to life emotionally, intuitively, aesthetically. We have revulsions and attractions. These are all moral dimensions, wonder and awe, and they should not be considered superficial or superfluous to any discussion about the future of nature. So when we experience nature in its awesome immensities and ingenuity, reverence is actually a valid response. So, in what can we hope? I'm not sure, but the alternative is despair, environmental security only for the privileged, a militarized world, and for me these are just simply not options. So hope requires an ecological awakening, a moral compass, political action, and courage. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather,
At
for
the
your
line.
impressively timely meditation. If I could,
Yes, if we have some questions, some questions. So my question was actually what is the source of hope? Because nature has actually some very undemocratic ways of behaving, and you have cruelty and the survival of the fittest in nature, because animals are killing one another to survive.
Sure.
So what is the hope? The
So-
source of hope?
I would disagree with you that the natural world is cruel. I would say that's an anthropocentric view of the natural world. I think that processes in the natural world are adaptive. So we don't talk about survival of the fittest anymore. We talked about the survival of the fittingest, or it's the processes of adaptation. So there are people who would say the natural world is very wasteful because there are more lives lost than saved. There are more species that have gone extinct than have ever existed. But truly, the only animal that is cruel is the human. I mean, that if you actually look, when do animals kill other animals? Almost never for sport. Occasionally orcas, occasionally rhesus monkeys. But virtually, they do not kill for sport. So who kills for sport? Who added another animal? No.
Dolphins.
Dolphins. But sometimes animals will keep another animal alive to teach. So you see cats playing with mice and we say, how cruel. But this is an adaptive, this has been very studied by people like Mark Bekoff and many others. And I don't think that hope, I don't think there's a simple answer to the source of hope. I think there are many sources of hope, there's many ways to understand hope. But in our era, if we think that we're going to salvage this era, I think that's incorrect. So if we put our hope there, we will only be disappointed. If we think, okay, we're just going to go gracefully into decline. I'm actually fairly sure Bill McKibben is right about that, but I'm not sure we're going to go gracefully unless we choose to go gracefully. What I see happening in the world is waters being protected by the rich. China is doing land grabs all over the world, including in Quebec. What I see is the food insecurities issues growing all over the world, and it's multinational corporations getting the copyrights. So, like, what you see is the corporate militarized world rising. So for me, that's not hope. It has to be an antidote. But the source of it is really impossible to say with any great intelligence, in my view. The Christian tradition has put hope in an afterworld. I would think that is very wrong. And I speak as a Christian theologian, for the record, and I think that's one of the problems, is where we locate hope. So I would not locate it in optimism. I think the natural world is creative, it's adaptive, it's responsive, it is life-giving. That, to me, if we understand enough science, how can we not feel that there are regenerative processes in the earth, evolutionary processes, that we can say, there may be a post-human future, but maybe there'll be a vibrant earth. But I don't know. No one knows. Yeah, okay. Quickly, yourself, and then.
How easy would it be to have hope in the face of all the concrete data that is being presented to us by science? Like, okay, I watched a documentary recently, The Last Oasis, and they were telling us water is about to run out of the planet.
Yeah.
And we have such concrete data that's telling us there's very little we can do.
Yes, I know.
And where you're recommending hope in hope, while we have so much telling us that there's little we can do, how are we supposed to conjure up hope from thin air to battle fact?
So I've done this a long time. And I would say I cried for 10 years straight about the state of the planet. But despair is, I mean, you have to choose to say there are alternative roads that are life-giving. So the ones I mentioned, understanding science, aligning oneself with the ecological ethics, developing an ecological imaginary, and joining the ecological democracy movements that I think have to be quite radical. And I think they have to be very strong movements of resistance. So the question is, to me, those are acts of hope. But if you ask me, I mean, I know that there's not going to be large mammals left. The evolutionary trajectory of virtually all the large mammals is over. So that is a very, very despairing reality. However, it is the reality. So for me, there's no skirting the truth. We have to stand in front of what we understand. But then we have to choose something that is the most life-giving option for the most of the Earth community. And if you ask me, is it difficult? Excruciatingly. There's nothing simple about this, and there's nothing easy. But these are the choices. That's what I see. So I feel like it's a bit like Schindler's List, if any of you know that. You know, you have to act for hope. We are required to act for hope. Otherwise, we join the militarized state. And to me, that it's not an ethical option, it's not an ecological option, it's not an economic option. It's not an option. So this gentleman had some.
Thank you for an excellent focus. On the question of hope, I wonder if, from a kind of evolutionary point of view, you share the notion that hope is in the young, that is, those who haven't yet reproduced, so whose future
That's an interesting,
we're sort of looking at. In terms of a more positive vision of the future, one word that I haven't yet heard today in a very rich series of papers is the word Gaia.
Mm-hmm.
Does that enter into your thinking?
So James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, who developed the understanding that the Earth, the best image of the Earth is as it's a living organism, a living planet, that it has, there's a multiplicity of differentiations, but there's also something in unity with the planet. I think that those images really help us. I think there's a sufficient amount of science behind Gaia as a scientific theory rather than a spiritual understanding, that it's strong enough to stand, it stands the scientific test more or less. What is a little difficult is the evolutionary biologists. What is very difficult is the Cenozoic era, the evolutionary trajectories don't look good, let's just say. They don't look good. So the Anthropocene as the rise of the human doesn't look good either. So we have to find something else that means the planet has to be able to work. We have to deal with the regeneration pathways of the planet. So that's the rainforests, that's the state of the oceans. These are the areas of ecological intensity. So it's where there's huge amounts of genetic diversity in very concentrated places, and the state of the oceans is where all evolution emerges from the state of the ocean. So the evolutionary biologists are looking to the state of the oceans and measuring that far more carefully now than they're measuring the Cenozoic. But I don't know if that's much of an answer, but Gaia is a very good image. But people need to be scientifically literate, or else we just go off the deep end with some other crazy ideas easily. Anyway, thank you for contributing to that. That's a good point.
One very last question, Patrick, because I was cruelly curtailing your own question.
Comment and a question. I enjoyed the presentation. I think I share a lot of your priorities and positive values. I don't think we share the same paranoias. I think my paranoias are slightly different than yours, and some of your emphasis on paranoias is definitely different than mine. My question is, in several instances during your talk, you referred to the cruelty of man, the violence of human beings towards the natural world and to each other, and yet your articulated hope is in a global solidarity movement among human beings with presumably a new relationship with nature. I'm interested to know or to hear from you, what are the conditions that transform human beings with such a long history of cruelty and violence to this emancipatory moment, which is, as you say, is very radical, not from an institutional perspective alone, but from a consciousness. There's a radical consciousness change. And so I'd be interested to hear what happens to get us to the promised land.
I don't frame things as the way you are in terms of from here to there. I think there are processes, there are movements and insights and awarenesses that are changing that I've seen in 25 years of work that offer some viable future directions. It's not promised land, utopia, so it's just future directions that offer hope, that I will put my energies in, and I don't know what the results will be. When we talk about the cruelty of humans, I did not say that actually. If you talk about the cruelty of man as a feminist, I think there is a bit of evidence for that actually, but I would put that in patriarchy. Patriarchy has been the social system for 5,000 years, and one of the pillars of patriarchy is domination. It's thinking that domination is a mode of social interaction that is viable. There's been so much analysis of patriarchy done by feminists, and it has been dismantled theoretically. It has not been dismantled practically. But all of the anti-colonialist movements, all of these are anti-modes of domination. So it hasn't been human domination. It has been, for the most part, men. I am not at all saying men are inherently violent. I'm saying patriarchy gives men a license for violence. And that has been challenged. So I think that is the issue of violence. So I work in peace and conflict studies now. So the license we give for violence is huge. It's huge for social violence. Men and women participate in all of this ideologically. So women participate in all of the ideological apparatus of violence. So it's nothing to do with men or women being different. It has to do with how we are located socially. There are people, there are evolutionary biologists who say humans come from chimpanzees. We have a very close DNA, 98.86 something. We've shared DNA with chimpanzees, who are one of the more violent branches of primates. So that violence is in our species. I don't know if that's true or not true, but I know that unless we start discussing violence in a very, very serious way, we're not going to have much of a future at all. So people in my world study Gandhi, Martin Luther King, as how do you mount social movements based on nonviolence? And those are actually gaining traction also all over the world. If you're asking me, are they going to win? I don't know, but they are growing all over the world. Nonviolence is moving as an anthropological choice, a social choice, a political choice. It's got to be better than violence.
And on that note.
And on that note.
Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the speakers and the audience for the thoughtfulness, poise, and above all, perseverance with which you have traveled the last 3 hours. And perhaps as just a parting word, perhaps something to keep in mind over the next 3 days of the conference is that we're all aware of the harsh ecological realities within which we live. But here at this conference, we travel more in hope than expectation. Thank you all. Have a very good afternoon.